Okay, welcome back to the channel. Just got these out of the tumbler. Those are shiny. They're pretty. Man, there's something about reloading that's so much fun. Anyway, get those out of the way. Let the ADHD stop for a second. Today's subject is barrel length and how it affects muzzle velocity and energy. And also, we'll talk about the importance of muzzle velocity at the same time, because this kind of ties hand in hand. With barrel length, the longer your barrel, the longer your bullet's under pressure, therefore the more velocity you get. There are some caveats. It is possible to have a barrel length that's so stupidly long that it actually is counterproductive. This has actually been proven in the 22 long rifle, but we won't get into that today. But for today, we got a couple cartridges we're going to compare. We're talking about going from a 24-inch barrel to a 22-inch barrel to a 20-inch barrel. And we got 30-06 and 6.5 PRC. And the reason I'm going with those is one is not overbore and the other is overbore. And you'll see that one has an advantage over the other, but there's still a typical pattern you'll notice. Larger cartridges need good barrel length. And 22 is probably the sweet spot for a lot of cartridges. This obsession with going with a Magnum type cartridge in a 20-inch barrel, basically a snub-nosed rifle, is stupid. That's my take, and I'm not going to apologize for it, but it's stupid. And I'll show you why. And it's very, very simple. I wrote down some numbers. So here we go. Starting off with the 30-06, a common bullet weight for that is the 165 grain Federal Fusion. So I did go with that 65,000 PSI using 58 grains of N540. That stayed the same number for all of these. Go from 24-inch barrel, I have 2,973 feet per second with 3,239 foot-pounds of energy. That's a good amount of energy. That's not much shy of a 300 Win Mag. And then you go from that to a 22-inch barrel, you have 2,914 feet per second and 3,112 feet per second. So still not a slouch. It's still actually a really good velocity. It's a good amount of energy. But notice your loss. You got 59 feet per second of loss, and you have 127 foot-pounds loss of energy. And that's really not a ton, especially when you're talking about only hunting within like 400 yards. It's not going to really matter all that much. But notice where it starts adding up. When you go from the 22-inch barrel to the 20-inch barrel, you have an even greater drop. So here's your muzzle velocity, 2,847 feet per second and 2,970 foot-pounds. You have a drop of 67 feet per second and a loss of 142 foot-pounds of energy. Your total loss is 126 feet per second and 269 foot-pounds. That's not a close gap. So when somebody says something along the lines of, oh, it's only 100 feet per second, let me go to the tail of the tapes. There's another piece I'm going to pull up here. And I know I have it because I did it the other day. Only 100 feet per second. I'll show you what the difference of only 100 feet per second means. So we did the 270 versus 30-06 rematch as far as who shoots flatter. Using that same data, here's the difference is in your velocities. Now let me go back to this one. Okay, here it is. So you have, using the same parameters, but the difference of the 65,000 PSI, using the same barrel lengths and same everything, at the 500, so this is going with the 65,000 PSI, the difference between this is 2,845 feet per second, and here is only a different this is at the 60,000 psi, 2,750 feet per second. So you're talking 95 feet per second difference. Yeah, it's still under that 100 feet per second. What's the difference? The energy. That's the difference. 3,414 at the 65,000 psi. Okay? 2,519, a difference of 900 foot-pounds. So, tell me, does velocity matter? Yeah, velocity absolutely matters. Now, I'm not saying you have to have something that's going to be constantly smoking fast. You don't need a, 4,000 foot per second 30 cal. I mean, it'd be cool. I don't know anybody that wouldn't want one because it's just cool. But do you need one for practical hunting and target shooting? Of course not. But when you say something stupid like, oh, velocity doesn't matter, you sure that the numbers back you up on that, buddy? Because they don't. Here's the way it works. With this load going only 2750, which is not a slouch, but you max out on your ethical elk range at 500 yards. Your ethical elk range going that extra 100 feet per second stretches you out to 800. So that 100 feet per second translates into 300 yards of ethical hunting range. Because when you actually break down the term feet per second of what it actually means, it's actually, the total saying is feet per second of flight. So the theory is that if you and I are at the range, we have a flat open field in front of us, we have identical cartridges, identical barrel lengths, identical everything. And I'm shooting 3,000 feet per second, and you're shooting 2,800 feet per second. When we shoot at the same time, and that bullet has a chance to go down range and fly for 1 second, your bullet stops and hits the ground 200 feet short of mine. And that doesn't sound like a big, realistic, big deal or whatever. But when you break that down, 3,000 feet is 10 football fields. And 2,800 feet is 9 1/3 football fields. So you're shy by like 67 yards. And if you're even if you have the scope that can dial, big whoop, it doesn't matter. You're still short. It's not the same thing. Now, do you have to have the ultra highest? No, of course there's the caveat. For the guy, if you're only shooting 200 yards on your game, or 300 yards, or even 400 yards, do you need to be worried about it so much? Of course not. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the difference of your trajectories and your energies transferred down. The same BC bullet, the same weight bullet, everything. Your barrel lengths change that. And going back again, we did a 30-06. Here's the 6.5 PRC. More evidence. We're using the 143 3-grain ELDX. Again, the 65,000 PSI. 54 grains of N160. 24-inch barrel. You get 2,927 feet per second. 2,720 foot-pounds. 22-inch barrel. 2,865 feet per second. And 2,606 foot-pounds. A loss of 62 feet per second and a loss of 114 foot-pounds. Going to a 20-inch barrel. Muzzle velocity, 2,794 feet per second and 2,479 foot-pounds. A loss of 71 feet per second and 127 foot-pounds. A total loss of 103 feet per second and 241 foot-pounds of loss. That's a big gap. And so here's the thing. I'm going to ask for the guys who want to do short-barreled rifles, and I'm going to say this right now, there's nothing wrong with them in themselves. There's nothing wrong with a short-barreled rifle in themselves. But it doesn't make sense to do it with a Magnum type cartridge. It needs the barrel length. And so we looked up some information to help out a buddy of ours with, let me pull this up here, with his 6.5 Creedmoor, because it has a 20-inch barrel. And so here's some data. We just went over that. Here's one that we could do very viably to shoot almost identically with that 6.5 PRC out of a 20-inch barrel. A Berger 140 grain hybrid hunter, which is going to have a high BC. It's up in there at that 0.62, 0.63 range, much like this 143 grain ELDX. And they're basically the same construction. They're only 3 grains of weight off of each other, which means your energies are going to be virtually identical. Pushing it up to that max pressure, kind of like I did with this. Here you go, 45.5 grains of Ramshot Hunter gets you 2,783. Okay? You're talking a difference of only 11 feet per second. If you're going to build a short-barreled rifle, don't do it in a Magnum. You can do it for less in a 6.5 Creedmoor, getting the same energies and trajectories, and save yourself a bunch of money and recoil to the shoulder as composed to doing in a 6.5 PRC. So why would you build that? It doesn't make sense. And going back to the end, here's the balance of it too. Do you need the fastest? Of course not. Because here's going back to some more of the data we wrote down. Using my own rifle as an example, 270 Winchester with the Ramshot Hunter, pushing it 3,015 feet per second. And let me find that other piece that I did. But going with my actual hand load that I use in my rifle, I have it going 2,950 feet per second. And the difference between them in energy and trajectory is actually very, very minimal. If I push it out to 500 yards, so at 2,950 feet per second, at 500 yards, I still have a velocity of 2,320 feet per second and an energy of 1,793 and a drop of 34.3 inches. At 500 yards here, I have a velocity of 2,377 feet per second, of energy of 1,881, and a drop of 32.7. So my energies are pretty close, and my velocities aren't that far off either. And my drops are very similar, within a couple inches. So in this instance, the velocity doesn't matter because I was seeking accuracy first, as opposed to just sheer force. But if you're going to be building a rifle and you're looking to have something that makes sense and does its job well, you need to consider your burn rates, what it's going to do, what's involved. The last thing you want to be doing is having unburnt powder, especially when you start adding things like suppressors. Those unburnt powders have to go somewhere, and one of the biggest issues with a suppressor is mirage, which can really mess with your ability to see past the end of your rifle. The more unburnt powder you have that exits your barrel, the worse your mirage is going to be. And then it also gums up your barrels faster, it gums up your action faster. There's a lot of negatives. Velocity matters, so does your burn rates, and so does your cartridge in comparison to your barrel length. So do your own research, look it up. But if you're going to build a short-barreled rifle, don't build it in a Magnum. Build it in something closer that has a better burn rate. 6.5 Creedmoor, 243 Winchester, 22 Creedmoor, 308, 7mm weight. You can build those that have a much higher efficiency out of those shorter barrels because they have a smaller powder reservoir. It's easier for them to consume that powder in a shorter barrel. And even so, you really shouldn't go much shorter than a 22-inch barrel. because that's like the optimal burn rate. For most short actions and average cartridges, 22-inch barrel is the sweet spot. You can do a lot with a 22-inch barrel. You're not losing much off the 24, but you're definitely getting a lot better than you are in a 20. So, if you're building a rifle or you're buying one for the first time, take a good look at this and don't make the mistakes that a lot of other guys are doing. Putting a 300 Win Mag in a 20-inch barrel is just useless. The entire point of a Magnum is into a larger rifle with a longer barrel. That's their bread and butter. That's what they do best. It's kind of like putting a race car driver, in a semi truck. It doesn't work. Or putting a semi truck driver in a race car. It also doesn't really work. Build your rifle accordingly. There's a reason why there's so many specs out there. I know there's a lot of data to wade through, but do your research. I promise you it's well worth it. And if you do that, you will have a much better shooting experience than if you just went with your first idea off the top of your head. I guarantee you, if you go with a standard size case like the 6.5 Creedmoor or 308 or 243 in a shorter barrel, you'll be better off than you would if you try to put a Magnum of any kind, whether it's a short action or a long action. So that's my rant for today. My opinion. Share yours in the comment, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.